Yes, now we are live.
Okay, wonderful. So, wonderful good evening for those who are actually joining us in our time zone, or good morning, good afternoon to those in other time zones, or good night for those of you who are joining in the middle of the night. Welcome to the live Q&A of the OceanMOOC, this time on the topic of fisheries and aquaculture. And we are glad that we were able to secure 3 world-renowned experts on these topics. So we have online today Peter Bossier on aquaculture, Mark Dickey-Collas on fisheries, and Jürgen Matern on seafood and consumer questions. But I will address them in a second so that they can give you a short introduction on them just in 1 to 2 minutes. And then we are jumping in and trying to answer all of your immediate questions, your burning questions. So please already start typing them in the live chat window. I will collect them and then address the speakers of today. So maybe we start with you, Peter. Maybe you can give your short introduction.
Yes, good evening. I'm Peter Bossier from Ghent University, from the Faculty of Bioscience Engineering. And at that faculty, we have a lab of aquaculture and also Artemia Reference Center. I'm working there since 2002, and since about 4 years, I'm head of laboratory.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Peter. Hans-Jürgen Matern, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Good evening. My name is Jürgen Matern. I worked 26 years for Matern Group, one of the bigger retailers in the world. We introduced the traceability program for traceability on fish in the last 3 years, now covering more or less the German market, North Atlantic market. I'm representing Metro in the World Economic Forum, New Vision on Oceans, and in the North Atlantic Seafood Forum as Director on Oceans and Sustainability.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Mark, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Dickey-Collas. You can see me on Twitter at Dickey-Collas. It's very straightforward. I'm the Ecosystem Approach Coordinator here at the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, who are the main marine science network for the North Atlantic, with over 20 countries, including the USA, Canada, many EU countries, Norway and Russia and Iceland. I also head up the work package on ecosystem approach for fisheries management and ecosystem-based management for the Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance. And I'm a member of the science committee for IMBA, the Integrated Marine Biosphere Research Group. I've got 25 years in fisheries in Northern Ireland and in the Netherlands as national experts, mostly on pelagic fish, or the science for pelagic fish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. So you see that we have 3 experts which are able to answer all of your questions. I'm collecting questions right now, and there is one question already from the forum, and Julia asked about the role of aquaculture for future food security. I think that's a quite interesting question that maybe all of you 3 might want to answer, but maybe we'll start addressing Peter on this one.
Thank you very much for that question. Well, students might know that aquaculture, the share of aquaculture in the supply of aquatic food production has been increasing drastically over the last 20-30 years. On average, something like 8% per year. I guess we are now close at something like 50% of all aquatic food being produced by aquaculture rather than fisheries. It is anticipated that this will still increase in the future. And so the main question, basically, where is the food going to come from to culture all the fish that we all want to eat? That is the main question, basically, for the future.
Okay. Mark, do you also want to comment on that, or?
With regards to food security, we all know And our models tell us that if we fish sustainably, we can increase further the catches coming along. And I think it's also important to remember that particularly with aquatic food, it's the vitamins and the nutrients which are almost as important. So the world may not really need more protein, but it certainly needs more nutrients. And that's what we need to look for in what we do. It's also crucial that Europe, in terms of fisheries, realizes that it cannot export its degradation of the marine environment by moving to take fisheries foods from outside Europe and claim that we have clean seas in the European context.
Mm-hmm. Jürgen, do you also want to comment on that more from a retailer perspective or sustainability?
Yes, so Matern is the retailer who is selling the biggest amount of fish annually in the global market. So around 200,000 tons of fish we are selling, and we saw in the last 10 years that the percentage of aquaculture products is growing dramatically. Starting 1990s with the fish program, we had more or less 80% of wild catch fish. Nowadays, it's more or less 50-50. And we see that aquaculture can play a major role in feeding the growing world population in the next decades.
Okay, thank you very much. And there's already the next question already on. There's a question from, and I hope that I pronounced the name correct, Shirley Biswas, specifically to you, Peter. And she asked, or he asked, given that fisheries in Asia are exposed to a lot of contaminated water, what can be done to remedy those sewage-related bacterial infections? It's a very specific question, but maybe your
question. So we all know that as aquaculture is on the increase and is also being intensified for a lot of fish species, that there is a growing problem with diseases, new diseases. All types of problems are going to come up. They are already there, but if the demand for fish from aquaculture is even further increasing in the future, we will be definitely faced with this kind of problems. There are solutions on the ways, but they need to be worked on in the sense that, for instance, we can go much more to closed systems at pond level or even recirculation systems. We can also work in the direction of much more integrated aquaculture with different trophic levels of fish species and even mollusks that also deals with a certain degree or in a certain degree with disease issues. So there are many ways forward, but they are all in their, let's say, in their infancy at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And there is, so I think that this was a question related to Peter, and I'm going directly to the next question, which is also related to aquaculture. So aquaculture seems a hot topic here, but that is a good question that might also be something that can be answered by Mark and Jürgen. So Christina asks, there are big efforts being done to replace fish meal and fish oil with vegetable meal or vegetable oil. However, since the aquaculture sector is growing so heavily, will the need for fish meal go down anytime soon in the future? And I mean, that is also related to the sustainability aspects that some people are saying, okay, aquaculture can't be the future because you're still using so much fish meal, so you need replacement. But is that something that is coming, or do we see, even more in growing use of forage fish in fish meal and fish oil production to feed other fish in aquaculture, Peter?
Well, as I told you already in the beginning, where the ingredients are going to come from in the future is a major issue, and that indeed relates to protein and relates to oil. I guess the solution for oil is probably a little bit simpler in the sense that we can grow macroalgae or macroalgae to produce the oils that cannot come from catch. To produce sufficient amount of proteins to grow the fish is probably a little bit more complicated in the sense that if you substitute marine proteins for terrestrial proteins, that is not necessarily the way forward, so to speak, because you substitute the pressure in the sea to the pressure on land. So that is not the way forward. But if you look at the little more broader sense, I guess we can culture the sea in much more different ways than we are doing now. For instance, we can culture much more extractive, what we call extractive species, like mollusks. That could be a way forward. So species that are filtering seawater and focusing more on that, or in co-culture, for instance, with fish, so that we can obtain much more edible food from the same amount of proteins that are being invested into aquaculture. So I don't know if that helps a little bit in answering. It doesn't solve the whole issue, but it's part of the, the solution.
Yeah.
If I can step in.
Absolutely. And then, so Jürgen, go ahead, and then we go to you, Mark.
I was invited, I think it's now 2 years ago, from the EU in Brussels for a discussion to produce insects to feed the fish. And we had a discussion to produce black soldier flies to produce the protein for the fish feed, for the aquaculture. It was difficult at that time to start with a project in Europe, but in Asia and in other parts of the world, it's a common issue to use protein from insects to feed animals, to feed humans. In Germany, in Europe, it's a more bit difficult and academic discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very interesting. Mark, you also wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, my comment about nutrients was for human consumption. I acknowledge if you're going to feed them to other fish, you need the protein. If you're in a context, though, of thinking about forage fish, I think it's crucial to remember that a forage fishery can be well managed and sustainable, as we've shown with many of the forage fisheries in Northern Europe, such as the sand eel, which are now managed very carefully in relation to bird populations, and also in relation to things like capelin off Iceland and Norway. They're very carefully monitored, fit into multi-species models, and managed very strictly every year in terms of what catch is available. You're right, though, there's not much potential for those fisheries to increase their yield.
That is true. And then a related question to that, I mean, it's also because you're feeding something that could be potentially fed directly, is also a question by Mircea asking about the nutritional value of seafood from wild catch compared to the nutritional value of aquaculture. Is there actually a difference, and does it matter what you eat, if you eat wild or if you eat from aquaculture? I'm not sure who wants to start answering that one. I'm pretty sure that all of you could potentially answer that, but
I could not.
Okay, you could not. That's good. Then we jump to either Peter or Jürgen. Peter, do you want to comment on that?
From the nutritional point of view for human nutrition, I'm not so sure I have the proper answer. I know there has been lots of discussions on contamination levels, which is a very difficult discussion, basically, because sometimes apples and pears are being compared rather than the right things are being compared. But on the nutritional value, I'm not so sure I can say something, because basically the nutritional value of every fish that is being presented to the consumer depends on what that fish has been eating. And so there are a lot of feeding protocols for those fish. So I can imagine that the nutritional value of aquaculture fish can vary as much as the nutritional value of wild fish. And so it's not easy to compare them with each other. But in general terms, I would not dare to say that there is a big difference. I remember being once after a panel discussion, challenging the public and trying to distinguish blindly between wild sea bass and cultured sea bass. And it was basically very difficult. And the only difference people could come up with was the texture of the fish. That says very little about nutritional value. But just to indicate that sometimes it's not so easy to distinguish wild and cultured fish if you do it in a blind test, despite what a lot of people claim that there are differences there.
Yeah.
Do you want to add something on that, Jürgen?
I can completely underline that what Peter said, and he gave a more or less complete answer.
Okay, perfect. But there is actually also a question that is, well, not directly related, but also a very interesting question to you, Jürgen, is Hermelini asks, Mr. Matern, most consumers look primarily at the price of fish, but can you tell us how successfully awareness is to make them reconsider which fish they buy? So is it just the price, or is there more, variability in how consumers are actually prefer fish, or the preference of to specific species? I mean, you might have a good overview on that.
Yeah, price is always a good argument for consumers. The first issue they are looking for is a good price, but a good price for example, Pangasius is something different than a good price for a sea bass. And so we have different levels of products in the shelf, and that attracts different groups of people, let me say that, in that way. So, and we have good experience in high price products like monkfish, like sea bass, like turbot, and for other species. But the mass market, of course, is price, a low price segment, like Pangasius, like Sewage, or others.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's actually another question that is related to the. So people are jumping back to aquaculture and fish meal. I think that seems to be an interesting topic for them. And there was a question. So if we can substitute, or if there is so much fish meal used, isn't there the potential of substituting it? And you already answered that partly. That you said yes, you can, of course. But that was to like vegetable meal and oil, or like insects. But there's a specific question in relation to microalgae, because most of the essential fatty acids are coming from microalgae. So why not culturing microalgae and feed them as fish oil, or use them as additives to the food for fish? So what is the role of microalgae, and is it probably growing because the demand is growing, and so the price might raise for fish oil?
If I can come in here, so there has been something like 10 years ago, there was an increased interest again in growing microalgae. I guess that at the moment the whole sector has come to the realization that microalgae are part of the solution, but not the complete solution. Is that from a financial and economical point of view, it's interesting to grow microalgae if you can extract from that high value products, like for instance, fish oil or oils in general. If they, I guess the technology at the moment to grow microalgae is not sufficiently developed that you can say that we can grow or extract from that marine proteins in an economical way. I guess the way we do that at the moment does not allow to do that in an economical way. So microalgae are part of the solution, but are not the complete solution, if I can summarize it like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And there's another question that is related again, is going back to the fact that you are actually harvesting a lot of forage fish for fish meal production. The question is, if you don't need those anymore for fish meal, can't you use them directly for human consumption? Is there actually a market for those fish for human consumption, or is it that people are just not eating them due to many reasons? So what is your experience here? Maybe that is something that all of you three can actually answer. Maybe Peter starts and then...
Mark can comment on the fact what kind of fish is being harvested mostly for fish meal. And that would tell us immediately something if the consumer would consume those fish, yes or no.
Yeah, but there's another thing here. It depends who your consumer is, yes, or are. I'm lucky to work with some of the pelagic fishing industries here in Europe, and they have developed markets for what were perceived as trash fish. Mm-hmm. And they process on board and they supply a lot of protein to West Africa and Asia particularly blue whiting and some of the, and boarfish as well. Although boarfish is mostly going, no, sorry, that's wrong. Boarfish is all going to oil and meal, but the blue whiting is going for human consumption. So it depends on whether you can stimulate a market for it and create a need. And I think there's certainly potential working with sand eel, working with capelin, but it'll take some doing and probably some processing.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a question of level of processing to get an attraction to consumers.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But I have heard some, I'm going to use the wrong phrase. What's the Japanese product? Surimi?
Yeah, surimi.
Which is extremely processed and yet manages to create a protein product that people seem to want to buy.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. Part of the solution will also be to make much better use of the proteins that we extract from the marine environment. We ourselves are involved in experiments where we grow, rather than monocultures, we grow, for instance, and for tropical species, we grow shrimp and fish together, at a certain level in the food chain, enabling us to extract the double amount of protein out of the food that's being introduced. So also that is part of the solution. So there are the solutions will have to come from many different corners in the future, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And that is, as you say correctly, is related to also having a market for all of these products. So, and you said that is, of course, related to preference and consumer preference and how you process them. Have you experienced, Jürgen, have you experienced that already in your lifetime, that you had, completely new products entering, for example, the European market, where you wouldn't have said, okay, this is something that could be of interest, or maybe as another example where you introduced, intentionally a new product because it was maybe something that was on the market but wasn't used so far on the European market. Have you experienced in that?
Yeah, there are a lot of changes in the last 10 years. Though in the beginning, we more or less had the well-known products, cod, saithe, salmon, trout, and on the shelf. Now it's growing into around 70 different products from 70 different species we are selling. Reduces the catch pressure on each and every single species. And bringing new ideas for cooking into the kitchen. And the processed or market of processed products, salad with fish, corn with fish in tins, that is growing a lot. And they are really interesting products for consumers in a lot of countries.
Thank you very much. So we are jumping to some more complicated questions, I see. So Abio is asking, even though fisheries are being regulated, mostly in developed countries, he's adding, African nations still suffer from illegal industrial fisheries. How to stop this? It's just a very, very simple question, I think so, but maybe you can...
I think you need to define what you mean by illegal. Do you mean foreign vessels or do you mean local vessels? And that's very different in how you deal with them. Our experience in Europe is that the only way that you really prevent illegal behavior is not through command and control, not through enforcement. You obviously need that. But it is also by working with the fishing industry, by showing them the benefits and bringing them into the process in a much better way. Now, that's the way to deal with local. And that's also appropriate in small scale as well as large scale situations. If you're dealing with foreign vessels, then unfortunately you're having to, you are in a kind of an enforcement role, or it's up to national governments to sort out the agreements in that situation. That's what I'm offering.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. From my point of view, there are further answers to that question. So if you bring transparency into the market, then you can reduce illegal fisheries. And one of the topics Metro is investing a lot of time and money is establishing a global transparency program. And we show on the barcode, with the barcode on the product, where the product caught, where is it landed, where it is coming from, and different kinds of intermediate levels between catch and shelf. And looking back to the SCG 14 days in New York last month, we introduced this program as a World Economic Forum Division on Oceans program, and 14 big retailers from the globe joined our initiative, and we are now going together to ensure that products that on the products in the shelf on the shelf are shown where it is caught and where it is from.
Could I ask you a question? I agree with you completely that market pressures play a very important role in terms of illegal fishing. But are there cultural differences in terms of where this market pressure plays a role?
Not really. So we try to convince retail from Japan, from United States, from Africa, from Europe, and South America to join our initiative. And all continents are playing in that game now. And we developed a plan how we move forward for the next 2-3 years to assure that the fisheries, small and big scale fisheries, can follow our demand and help to assure that they can afford these new techniques. And with the satellite network around the globe, we are checking whether there is good quality in data which are put into the system.
Thank you very much. Did that answer your question, Mark? Yeah, I think so. So there are more very specific questions coming in again. As this is the newest one, maybe I pick it up. It's going back to the shrimp ponds. So we're jumping a bit here thematically, but that is due to the fact that these questions are just coming up to the shrimp ponds. And there's a question of what are typical bacterial infections in these shrimp ponds that are not, well, which are the ones that are coming through, you know, the fact that you have runoff normally from land, which is probably going into these ponds, which is not cleaned because there's no wastewater treatment, and which bacterial infections are actually kind of just like self from the fact that you have high densities of shrimp in these ponds. So is there anything that you could say on that, Peter? I mean, that's a very specific question. I'm not sure if you have worked on
question. Yeah, well, diseases in shrimp ponds, and intensive or semi-intensive shrimp ponds are dual. In first instance, they are viral. There are a lot of viral diseases known, and they are indeed bacterial, and there are still other diseases. In relation to bacterial diseases, mostly originating from the group of Vibrio. In the past, we were a lot worried about Vibrio harvey, Vibrio campbelli. Lately, something like 3-4 years ago, there's a new player in the field, and there's a Vibrio parahemolyticus, which seems to have picked up a nice plasmid producing a very interesting toxin, and it kills shrimp in 24 hours. So that's the new problem in the shrimp industry in the tropical countries. Not easy to find solutions for, but the solutions are on the way, and the solutions are basically again related to a topic I've mentioned before is that the whole industry is moving more and more in the direction of recirculating systems, so that no flow-through systems anymore, where uncontrolled way diseases can come in and go out. Basically, that's something we have to move away from. We have to design and operate much more controlled systems in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So it was a kind of a interim question, very specific one to Peter. And we're jumping back to more general questions. So that's maybe for you, Mark. It's also a very interesting question. Mark, Ella asks, Mark, there is a big difference between fishing quotas that scientists suggest and quotas that politicians finally decide on. Why do politicians seem to ignore scientific advice?
Well, that's a beginning statement that could also be challenged. Many of the fisheries around the world are quite well managed in relation to the science. We can take Australia, New Zealand, Canada, USA, increasingly in Northern Europe, Norway, Iceland, and the North Sea and Celtic Seas are improving. Other parts of the world, and some of the South American as well, other parts of the world are very problematic and very different. The management is not so clear and not so agreed. So having taken that statement, why do politicians react and give other types of quotas than what the science advises? Science often advises in a very focused catch approach. We create simulations and we look into the future and we develop reference points and targets. And we try and fish to fulfill those, to stay away from certain levels and try and reach certain targets of fishing. So that's where we are. When you get a politician, they have a different set of objectives. And often John Pope actually called it, I think, maximum sustainable whinge. And by whinge, we mean complaining. So it's when a group in the country or in the region start complaining, that's when you start changing the way that you manage your fisheries. So when you're under pressure and you've got a mortgage to pay, and in 1 year you can go out and get a huge catch and pay off some of that mortgage rather than think about catches in 5 years' time, that affects the way you respond to what the scientists are advising. And I'm going to finish by saying that scientists aren't democratically elected, and we do come with our own agendas. And I think that's important to remember, that when you vote for your politicians, if you vote for your politicians, then it's they who are answerable to society. If you haven't voted for your politicians, well, then I'm not really going to help you there, and it's unlikely they would listen to scientists anyway.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think that was a very good answer to that question. Mirza has another question that is jumping back a bit to the question of traceability. So she's asking, I have another question, is it easy to track where the seafood is from when it comes from big fisheries? Or it's easy to track where the seafood is from when it comes from big fisheries. But how do we track small-scale fisheries, or where the catch comes from, which is sold in the local market? So, Jürgen, maybe you could comment on that.
So it's not so easy. You have to invest money and technique to assure that traceability is reliable and safe. That means if we have a market, a global market is asking for this. If we have a local sale, then I do not see the demand from consumers in that way, because they think that the product is coming from the region itself. And that makes it easy for them to buy. but in global markets, there is a need for this. And companies like Metro or Carrefour or Tesco, Ion in Japan, we more and more look for smallholders in the sector of fisheries to assure that we have a direct access to these local fisheries, and that we can help them together with public partnership programs from different governments to assure that the whole supply chain, including the smallholders, can afford to invest in this technique.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. Then there is a related question, actually. How much of the globally marketed fish is actually coming from small-scale fisheries so far?
Oh, good question. I do not have an idea.
Yeah, I think that is difficult to answer. I happen to know that, for example, countries like Senegal, you have a lot of export from small-scale fisheries into the Spanish and Portuguese or the Asian market already. So there is, of course, there is a question.
If I can make a small comment in relation to aquaculture, probably unlike a lot of people think, a lot of aquaculture is still freshwater aquaculture on a worldwide scale. And so this is carp especially, and so all carp is basically small-scale aquaculture. So from the aquaculture sector, I guess, if you look at it from a worldwide scale, a lot of fish is still coming from very small producers.
Yeah, that's correct.
So that is an interesting point, because then, of course, if you have all these carp coming from small-scale aquaculture, do you have or is it an issue? Because now we are talking about, traceability. We have certification schemes for fisheries, wild fisheries, but you start to have that as well from aquaculture. So is that a big issue in carp aquaculture, that you have this traceability issue or certification issue? And is it specifically difficult because you have most of the carp coming from small-scale aquaculture?
I guess, as far as I can see, carp aquaculture is very important, but this is all for local consumption. I guess this does not reach the world market. So I guess it's not that important. When it comes to other type of products like shrimp, which has a much higher value in the worldwide market, sometimes some countries like Thailand are very organized and they have associations and things like that. And that makes traceability much more important. Also, a lot of bigger retailers, Americans and Europeans, move into those countries and basically help organizing the traceability, because it's also in their interest that traceability is coming to a reality.
Yeah. And there are a lot of schemes in the market to assure that sustainability is supported, and that companies are, I wouldn't say forced, but supported to go into a more sustainable farming. GAA is one of that, Global Aquaculture Alliance. Then the World Wildlife Fund organization has created the ASC aquaculture. Oh, I missed the S. Peter, can you?
ASC, yeah, I'm just, no, I'm lacking, I'm a blackout as well at the moment.
What is ASC? And consumers in Europe, but as well in Japan and United States, they are looking for these eco-label labeled products, and they can find them already on a lot of products, aquaculture and wild catch.
Okay, thank you very much. We are jumping back to wild fisheries. There is a question by Minna, who asks, how are ITQs, and I need to translate that for those who don't know that acronym, individual tradable quotas, set, and are they different in different countries? Mark.
Ooh, quite a question.
Quite a question.
Yeah, we're getting into the world of economics here. Yes is the answer, and I can only give you my answer based on my European experience. Every country in the EU that has marine fisheries has a different policy on ITQs, and many of them have de facto ITQs, which allows them to trade their quota. And many of the countries also actually don't allow ITQs and yet trade quota. So there are some which have fully fledged things that are internationally recognized as ITQ, and I'll give you an example. In Denmark, there's a complete liberalization of the market, and yet there are other European countries where much trading of quota occurs, but officially there are not ITQs but other schemes. So that's where we are in the European context, and I don't think there is certainly a one-size-fits-all for how ITQs are brought about, certainly in the European context. And please don't underestimate the role of trading quota on fisheries worldwide. There are plenty of boats which make as much money trading quota as they do catching fish.
That is true from an economic point of view. You're right. It's going more into the economics of fisheries here with ITQs, and that is a quite big topic. We're jumping a bit again back to. There seems to be a lot of interest in aquaculture, and specifically in shrimp and the role of diseases. And there are two related questions, one from Thomas and one from Chevley again, which is going into, if you have these diseases and you want to, work against them, then one way of doing it is to use antibiotics. And is that a big problem? Is there a lot of antibiotics ending up in the end product? And if you don't want to use antibiotics, so that's a kind of two-level question now, then are there other drugs that you can use? And can we use or do shrimps have, or fish larvae have specific receptors or something that we can actually use to use some drugs which are not antibiotics, which might not end up in the end product? Quite complicated question, I think, but I'm not an expert.
At the same time, I would dare to say, let's start at the beginning. Are antibiotics being used? Decreasingly, I would dare to say. So antibiotics have been used in the past. Excuse me, I guess they are more and more being used just to remedy severe cases of mortality. They are not used anymore so much as in a continuous way, for which they are basically not fit for. Does that mean that not a single product coming in from a worldwide scale has not been in touch with antibiotics? I would not dare to say that. There are still a lot of farmers, especially small-scale farmers, who are facing crop loss, who are jumping to aquaculture to rescue their crop. Does that mean that, from a European perspective, that these products with residues of antibiotics are on our plate? Again, I guess the European Union has there a lot of security into place, and a lot of products are being screened continuously. And a lot of products are being sent back, especially in the past, have been sent back to their country of origin because of residues of antibiotics. So that's the situation number one. I guess the problem of antibiotics is being dealt with, but it will still be with us for a while. Are there other solutions around? Definitely there are other solutions around. People realize more and more that, as I told you already at the beginning, that the way shrimp has been grown so far will not be the way we grow shrimp in the future. And 5 or 10 years from now, we will move away completely, I guess, from these open pond systems into recirculation systems at pond level, or even in greenhouse structures, where we can control much more the microbiological quality of the incoming water, much more control the process, so that we can have less and less problems with diseases as we have now at the moment. So I guess the future is bright for shrimp culture, but it will mean that the sector will have to change considerably in the future.
Let me, from my point of view, so the retailers and the importers are checking the products which are imported again and batch by batch. And we see that a decrease of contamination is found. And nowadays we find we detect more or less in 1 per 100 deliveries contamination, despite a couple of years ago, more or less every fifth was contaminated. So there has already changed a lot.
Thank you very much. So contamination in this case with antibiotics.
But residues of antibiotics, yes. So it's definitely on the decrease, but the problem is not completely solved.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you look from it from the perspective of the small farmer, who his livelihood can be jeopardized by disease, it's understandable that people jump to the antibiotics as a solution on the short time scale. But it's on the long-term time scale that's definitely not the way forward. So it is understandable, but not the solution. It's not the way forward, basically.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So we have a question for Mark from Chevrolet, and that is keyword ecosystem approach to management. What are, in your view, the quintessential components to get this approach to work? And you just have a few minutes to answer that, Mark.
That's my job at the moment.
I know.
To get it to work, well, you have to understand what it's about and what it means. And what it means is it's about balancing the impacts and the services you take from the marine system as a whole. It's not about understanding the ecosystem. We need to manage human activities, both the positive sides and the negative sides, to ensure that there's a marine system for future generations. I think it's called generational equity. And with that in mind, we need to work with a dynamic ecosystem, which is constantly changing. There's no such thing as a static ecosystem. There's also no pristine marine ecosystem in the world either, and we're unlikely to get back there to a pristine ecosystem, in the same way that there's almost no pristine terrestrial ecosystem as well. So the key elements are to work with people, to remember that people are central to the ecosystem-based approach, to use what information and what knowledge you can, to ensure that everything is transparent and the management decisions are clear, to base it on evidence, and to ensure that the governance arena that all the evidence goes into is also equitable. I think that's almost everything. I haven't got my notes in front of me. There we go.
Well, no problem. I think that was quite complete, I would say, for the time that you had for answering the question, of course. And related to that, there was actually also a question again to aquaculture, because there seems to be a lot of ecosystem destruction caused by, for example, shrimp aquaculture in Asia. So is there a way forward actually in reducing the destruction that you see caused by aquaculture as well? So that is related, I think, to the ecosystem approach to fisheries management question in a way. Peter?
I'm not so well informed about that particular issue. I know, of course, that a lot of, well, there's competition for land, for aquaculture ponds with other areas like mangrove areas. And I will not deny that mangrove areas have been used in the past and are used at the moment to culture shrimp. But there is, as I understood, a lot of equally amount of mangrove destruction by city expansion or other kind of human activities. So it's not only aquaculture which claims sensitive ecosystems. It are also the entire human activity on this planet that claims sensitive ecosystems. So yeah, this is a matter of planning, aerial planning, spatial planning that will bring us forward, I guess, here.
Thank you very much, Peter. Marvali asks, and that is related to statistics, and I think a quite interesting one. So how much of global fisheries and aquaculture is so small scale that the fish catch does not show up in any statistics?
I'm afraid I can't answer that.
No idea.
Yeah.
By its very nature, that's an unanswerable question.
Isn't it? I think it's quite interesting. Just as a side remark, there is a website or data portal that is claiming that they started to get a better view on which amount of fisheries is taken or catch is taken from small-scale fisheries in countries which is currently not showing up, at least in the official FAO statistics, and that is the Sea Around Us database. It's not absolutely undisputed. There's a lot of people questioning that approach as well, but maybe you want to have a look at that. I'm posting the webpage later on in the chat window. But as I said, it's highly disputed if that approach is actually the more correct one, or if the FAO, the official FAO statistics, should be the one that should be used. So, oh, and there is another question coming up. So Dublicari asks, what do you think is the role of seafood in the future to ensure food security for an ever-growing world population? Is it as important as agriculture? So we're going back to the beginning of the live Q&A. So what will be the role of seafood in the future?
If I can, well, from an aquaculture perspective, I guess there was something like 1 year ago, there was a claim already that I guess the production from aquaculture was now as big as beef in the world. So I guess our food supply from the aquatic environment will continue to increase in the future. And this has a lot of different reasons. World population is growing, but also our age structure of the world population is changing, and people, the older we become, the more we are inclined to eat more fish. And I guess that can be commented upon from a consumer perspective. So I guess yes, more and more will come from the aquatic environment in the future, and that will require probably more and more planning in the marine environment, because I think from the freshwater end, aquaculture is not likely to increase so much in the future as from the marine point of end, but that the latter, so the marine aquaculture, will probably require a lot of marine planning in the future, and defining what we will allow as humans, population in the world to be developed for aquaculture and not to be developed for aquaculture. That's a very interesting point, basically.
If we define as a prerequisite that we eat in the future as much as protein as we do today,
yes,
then the oceans have to play a major role in serving the protein. That means we have to change the usage of the oceans, that we can get the protein out of the oceans. And we need to manage the different stocks of fish, the different species, in a different way than we do it today or than we did it yesterday. And there's a need that we do not think country by country, that we look for alliances, that we look for bigger approaches. And the World Economic Forum is a good place to place this. And they have brought in already something together in the new vision on oceans and how to manage oceans to assure that growing world population can be fed tomorrow.
One of the ways forward could be the increase of what aquaculturists call extractive aquaculture. So focusing on filter feeders in the ocean. They are very low in the food chain, and they gather for us all those marine proteins which are being produced. Of course, if you produce more and more of these filter feeders, that will also have its impact on the marine food chain. But that is potentially one way forward, to go much lower, to collect much more lower in the food chain than we are doing now at the moment.
And there is, of course, the we call them Miso-Pelagic fish, which estimates have recently put them up as very high in terms of biomass. And there are some of the issues in terms of krill as well, which is, again, lower trophic. But I know certainly the European Union is about to kick off a call for proposals looking at what we call mesopelagic, and those are the fish that live down below where the sunlight occurs. And they generally are very small, but recent estimates have them at quite a high biomass, and there are some models suggesting they can be exploited if it's a well-regulated fishery.
Yeah. Yeah, standing crops are not a very, of course, not a very good way of going about.
No, but they're small and have high turnover, so productivity is assumed to be high as well.
Okay, that's what we need, high turnover, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, we don't want to harvest the deep sea sharks, put it that way. They have a very high standing crop, but the turnover is low.
Yeah, so I will probably paste a link to a picture of a mesopelagic fish, because that will pose an interesting question on if you just use them for fish meal and fish oil to feed aquaculture, or if that is a source for direct human consumption. That is then again a marketing question, I think.
Could I also emphasize that a lot of this fish meal and oil also goes into mammals, such as pigs and cows and all sorts.
I guess it was, if I can jump in here, I guess it was like that something like 20 years ago. All the fish meal went to the pork industry, but since a lot of companies has realized that you can convert marine protein much better into other marine protein, being fish, by culturing fish than by culturing pigs, I guess most of the marine protein now goes in the direction of fish and not more in the direction of pigs. I guess.
Okay. I live in Denmark, so we're obsessed with pigs.
Because fish are much better converters of marine proteins than pigs are. So we have realized that. So that's why we do fish nowadays rather than pigs. Such an expensive product is not going in the direction of pigs anymore, I think.
Great.
Yeah. So thank you very much. We are close to the end of the live Q&A, and there are a couple of questions coming in right now, and I was just want to pick one which is related to some of the discussions that we had a bit before in relation to pollution, and that is related to plastic pollution. And the question is actually, do we see an increase, and specifically in microplastics, having an impact on the quality of the wild products? Have we already some insights in how that might affect the quality of wild caught fish, and would that impair maybe the use of wild caught fish in the future, because we have so much microplastics in the ocean accumulating?
Well, I'm going to talk on the fisheries side, and obviously we're marketing experts here as well. We recently have reviewed, or are planning to publish reviews on the evidence for the problems of microplastics, and to date there isn't any. So obviously the rise in microplastics is a problem of we don't know what the impacts will be. And that is the crucial issue. What we need is a lot more research into this, what appears to be a rise, but it seems to be taking the headlines and people are concerned, but the science basis behind microplastics is so weak, we can't say what the risks are. And that is the real challenge at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can only agree with that.
And it seems that Jürgen also agrees to that. So, so we are now 1 minute to the end, and I will give the speakers now the chance to, if you have a final word that you want to share with the student, to have like 30 seconds at the end before I close the live Q&A. Mark, maybe you want to start? Vision of future fish or something?
Well, I think fisheries as a whole need to still continue to consider that they are participatory, they provide services and have impacts, and it's balancing those two that are crucial. And we're discovering more and more that the big industries are moving in, but it's also a role for the small local people as well to provide food. Both have impacts, both need to be managed, and we need to find new ways to do that.
Thank you. I think that was a very fine last word, Peter.
As a person from the university, I would like to call for much more education from the very young until the very old on how and where our food is produced, including aquatic food, so that there is an increased awareness from where it's coming and how it is produced sustainably or fished sustainably. I guess that can be part of the solution for the future.
Thank you very much. Jürgen?
For me, management of ocean is key, and we need transparency wherever we are talking about fish and fish consumption. And everyone can help to assure that transparency is given via the products on the shelf.
Thank you very much. That was also very nice last words. So thank you very much again to all of our three experts in actually lending us the time, giving us the time of this 1 hour to answer all of your questions. So thank you very much. Have a nice evening, you three. I think you're all more or less in our time zone, so a nice evening for you three, and a nice evening, a nice day, a nice night, or whatever you are around the world. Thank you very much for joining in. Thank you very much for all of your brilliant questions, and continue watching the MOOC. And I also encourage our three experts to have a look at our OceanMOOC and have a look at the lively discussions in the fora. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.